Good evening and welcome to Mining the Riches of the Parsha. Tonight is Thursday night, May 4th, 2023. After a 3-year absence away from meeting in person, it is a deep emotional feeling for me to be back together and to be connected to you on Zoom at the same time. And I want to say thank you, God. Shehechiyanu v'kiyamanu v'higiyanu lazman hazeh. Thank you, God, that you have sustained us and you have brought us to this moment that we are able to be back together in person and to be back on Zoom together. I also want to express my gratitude to God for giving people, God's children, the intelligence and the initiative to create Zoom. Imagine how much worse the last 3 years would have been without Zoom. And consider how much we have supported each other and learned from each other because of Zoom over the last 3 years and moving forward as well. So thank you, God, for Zoom. It's not yet sunset here. Last night we counted the 28th day of the Omer. Counting the Omer is a mitzvah in this week's Torah portion, the Parsha of Emor. And just like the Shalosh Regalim, the 3 festivals, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkos, the Omer also has 2 layers. There is a historical layer and there is an agricultural layer. And it's the same for all 3 of the festivals. So the Torah says in our portion as follows: Ki savo el haaretz asher ani nosen lachem. When you will come into the land that I am giving to you, meaning God speaking to the Jewish people while they're traveling in the desert, when you come into the land of Israel that I am giving to you, uketzartem es ketzira, and you harvest your crop, vehevesem es omer, reishes ketzirchem el hakohen. You should take an omer, which is a measurement, a certain amount of that first crop, and you should bring it to the Kohen, to the Beis HaMikdash, the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. You should bring it as an offering. And the day that you will bring that, which is the 2nd day of Pesach, which is the 16th day of Nisan on the Jewish calendar, what that is going to do is something very important. V'lechem v'koli v'charmel lo sochlu ad etzem hayom hazeh. The harvest that you just harvested, the grain that you just harvested, you're not allowed to eat it until this offering, it was one offering, it was brought one offering on behalf of the entire Jewish people. Until this offering is brought on the 2nd day of Pesach, no one may eat from their newly harvested crop. Ad haviachem es karban elokechem, until this offering is brought in the Beis HaMikdash in Jerusalem on the 2nd day of Pesach. Now, let me explain. In ancient times, in the region of Israel, the main grain growing season was during the winter. In early spring, there was the barley harvest, and in late spring was the wheat harvest. Pesach, Passover, is scheduled by our calendar to approximately coincide with the barley harvest, and Shavuos, 7 weeks later, is approximately made to coincide with the wheat harvest. It's a little bit later. Now, the Karban Omer, the offering of the Omer, so it was an Omer, it's this measurement, it's a somewhat small measurement of barley from the first harvest of that year. So you take this measure of newly harvested barley, and it is brought as an offering in the Beis HaMikdash in Jerusalem on the 2nd day of Pesach, and it is brought with great ceremony and formal ritual. It's a whole big celebration. Now, that offering on the second day of Pesach parallels another offering called the Shtei HaLechem, the 2 loaves of bread. That was an offering that was made from the first harvest of wheat, and that was also brought with great ceremony and ritual on Shavuos, 7 weeks after. Now, so our Torah portion mentions bringing the Omer, and then the Torah says as follows: Usafartim lochem, and you should count, mimachoras haShabbos, miyom haviachem hazober etshlufa, from the second day of Pesach, the day that you brought the Omer offering, that's the barley offering. You count the days, Sheva Shabbosos Timimos Tiyena, 7 full weeks, that's 49 days, until Memachoras HaShabbos HaShviis Tispru Chaimishim Yom, the day after the 7 full weeks is the 50th day, that's Shavuos. V'ikravtem mincha chadash l'Hashem, and on Shavuos you offer a new offering of wheat. Mimosh vosechem taviu lechem tenufo shtayim. On that day you bring 2 loaves of bread that were made out of the new harvest of wheat. Just by the way, in parentheses, when the Torah describes the second day of Pesach, it says mimacharas haShabbos. Literally that means the day after Shabbos. But don't think that that means Sunday. It actually means the day after the first day of Pesach. Why is the first day of Pesach called Shabbos? That's a very interesting question. We'll leave that for another time. It's not relevant to our subject tonight. Okay. Now, so counting the Omer, this mitzvah that we're in the midst of, counting the Omer, is a misnomer. What we're really doing is we're counting from the day that the Omer was offered until Shavuos, when the 2 loaves are offered. In other words, we're counting from the offering of the barley until the offering of the wheat. And therefore, the counting connects the 2. And there is a parallel, because, as I mentioned before the Omer is offered on the second day of Pesach, no person could eat from the new harvest of any grain. First, you bring an offering to God, and then you can eat it yourself. Then you can enjoy what you have harvested. But until you bring an offering first to God, you're not allowed to enjoy anything that you have harvested. So bringing the offering on the second day of Pesach allows every person to enjoy their harvest. Similarly, or parallel, the 2 loaves of bread on Shavuos does the same thing for the wheat used in the Beit HaMikdash, in the Holy Temple. From that date, the new harvest of wheat can be used in the various offerings that required wheat, the bread and the cookies, the crackers, and the other baked goods that were offered there. However, the Omer offering is relevant to us today, but the Shtei HaLechem, the 2 loaves of bread, is really not so relevant to us practically, because we don't have the Beis HaMikdash, we don't have the ability to bring these 2 loaves of bread, so it is not as practically relevant. What is behind this structure, these mitzvos? So Rabbi Aharon of Barcelona, who wrote a very important work, I quote many times, Sefer HaChinuch, the book of Torah education, writes as follows: Mishrashei HaMitzvah, the root of this mitzvah is that we should reflect when we bring the Omer offering on the second day of Pesach, the first of the barley harvest, on the great kindness that God does with human beings to renew the produce of grain each year for sustenance. Wow, what an amazing thing. This year we have a harvest of barley. We had one last year. And now again we have it this year. With God's help, we'll have it again next year. It's an amazing thing. This is going to sustain us. This is going to keep us going. And therefore it is fitting that we should offer a small amount from this first harvest to remember God's kindness before we enjoy any benefit from it. So first we give it to God, and then we're able to take the rest for ourselves. In fact, Rabbi Tzvi Pesach Frank understands this idea from the text itself. Listen carefully. I read this verse before, but I was not so precise in translating it. Listen carefully. Ki savo el haaretz asher ani nosein lachem. God says to the Jewish people, when you come into the land that I will give you, the land of Israel, uketzartem es ketzira, and you harvest the harvest, the barley harvest, vehevesem es omer, and you will bring this measure of barley, reishis ketzirchem, the first of your harvest, el hakohen, to the kohen in the holy temple. Notice it shifts from calling it the harvest to your harvest. And the reason is as follows. Rabbi Frank says as follows. Before we bring the offering, it doesn't belong to us. We harvested it, yes. We planted it, we fertilized it, we made sure it was growing, we harvested it, but it's not ours. It doesn't belong to us. Until we bring the Omer offering, then the harvest that we harvested is our harvest. That's why it switches. First it calls it the harvest, meaning it belongs to God. Once we give an offering to show our gratitude to God, then it becomes our harvest. This is similar to the idea of making a bracha before we eat. We say that everything in the world belongs to God, and therefore, even if I made it, even if I paid for it, even if I bought it, even if it's mine in quotation marks, it belongs to God. When I make a bracha, I say a blessing, I recognize that it comes from God. That is when it becomes permissible for me to eat it. If I eat food without making a bracha, it's like I stole it from somebody. Once I make a blessing, then it's mine to enjoy. And the same idea applies to the Omer offering. Now, according to this, counting the Omer is not fully applicable today because we do not have these rituals in the Beis HaMikdash. We don't have the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. We do not actually bring an Omer of barley on the second day of Pesach. And therefore, the Rav, Rabbi Yosef Soloveitchik, explains that our mitzvah of counting the Omer is only a rabbinic mitzvah. It's a rabbinic commandment to remember the counting that did happen, and we hope will happen, when we do have the Beis HaMikdash. It's only when the Beis HaMikdash is present that there's a mitzvah to count, because you're connecting the Omer offering and the two loaves offering. But if you don't have those two, so what are we doing? Well, what we're doing is this rabbinic idea of remembering really what it is that we are missing. And this answers another question. When we count the Omer, so the first night that we count the Omer is on the second night of Pesach, the night of the second Seder. We make a bracha, a blessing, and then we say, on that first night we said, today is the first day of the Omer. But we do not make the bracha Shehecheyanu. Shehecheyanu is a bracha, a blessing that we make about any mitzvah that we fulfill from time to time, let's say annually. We make a bracha. When we blow shofar, we do it once a year, we make the bracha Shehecheyanu. We thank God for allowing us to arrive at this point, at this moment, sustaining us, and allowing us to be able to reach this point. But when we count the first night of the Omer, we don't make a bracha Shehecheyanu. Why not? Rav Soloveitchik explains, because it's not appropriate. Because Shehecheyanu means I'm celebrating. I'm celebrating, thank you God that you allow me to reach this joyous occasion. But for us, counting the Omer is not such a joyous occasion. For us, counting the Omer is remembering what we do not have. It's remembering what we lost. So the bracha of Shehecheyanu, to feel so happy that we have arrived at this moment, is not appropriate to this mitzvah, and that's why, according to Rabbi Soloveitchik, there is no bracha of Shehecheyanu. Okay. That's a discussion of the first layer, the agricultural layer of this mitzvah. But the Sefer HaChinuch, Rabbi Aharon of Barcelona, goes on to say that the agricultural layer of counting the Omer is the secondary layer of this mitzvah. The primary layer is to connect Pesach to Shavuos. Passover, the Exodus, with Shavuos, the revelation of God at Mount Sinai, and receiving the Torah, the Ten Commandments at Mount Sinai. Says Sefer HaChinuch, Mishrashrei HaMitzvah, at the root of this precept, Levi shekol ikaran shel Yisrael eino ela haTorah. The reason is that the entire main element of the life of a Jew is nothing other than Torah. This is the principal element and the reason why we were rescued and sent forth out of Egypt, so that we would be able to accept the Torah at Sinai and to fulfill it. And now, for this reason, we are commanded to count the days from the day after the Exodus, right? That's the second day of Pesach. The Jewish people left Egypt on the first day of Pesach. So on the next day to start counting, till the day the Torah was given, that's the day of revelation, that's Shavuos, to show with our very souls our great yearning for that distinguished day. We left Egypt yearning to be able to go to Sinai and receive the Torah at Mount Sinai. Rabbi Soloveitchik explains that according to this layer, our counting of the Omer is a biblical obligation, because the full expression of this effect applies to us today. We have today the same attitude of wanting to connect the experience of Exodus with the experience of Sinai, and we do that by counting the Omer to show when we leave Egypt how enthusiastic we are to be able to get to Mount Sinai. And therefore, this mitzvah of counting the Omer is the bridge that connects Pesach, the Exodus, and Shavuos, the revelation at Sinai and receiving the Torah. In other words, the mitzvah to count the Omer makes it clear that Pesach is meaningless. Liberation, freedom, is meaningless if we do not ask and answer this question. What is the purpose of my freedom? For what purpose will I use the freedom that I just gained? I can't just leave Egypt. I have to figure out, when I leave, where am I heading? And every one of us, every year, as we leave Egypt at the Seder, we have to ask and we have to answer that question. Rabbi David Wolpe writes, there is always the question of what happens after freedom. We find this earlier in the Torah, in the book of Bereshit, in Genesis, where Avram and Sarah, at that time they were known as Avram and Sarai, and there was a maidservant named Hagar. And Hagar was mistreated, and the Torah tells us she ran away. And when she ran away, the Torah tells us that an angel, a malach, an angel appeared to her and said to her, Hagar, where have you come from and where are you going? So the angel asks Hagar two questions. Where have you come from and where are you going? But Hagar's response is only an answer to one question. She responds and says, I have run away from my mistress Sarah because I was mistreated. She answers the question of where she's come from, but she doesn't answer the question of where she's going because she doesn't know where she's going. She does not have a plan. Contrast that with the famous words of Exodus where God says, Shalach es ami v'avduni, Let my people go free, that they may serve me. There is a direction for the Jewish people to take upon being liberated, to travel to Sinai. And you see this transition expressed in a very famous paragraph about matzah at the Seder. Remember, we read this at the Seder. Matzah zu shanu ochlim al shuma. Why do we eat matzah on Pesach? Al shum shelo hispik b'tsekam shel avoseinu lahachmitz. Because our ancestors did not allow the dough to rise in their haste to leave Egypt. V'lo yochlu lehismamea. They would not tarry. They did not delay. They wanted to leave quickly and hurriedly. And here's the point. When we finally had our freedom, when we were finally liberated and we were no longer slaves, when we had to choose, and we could choose for the first time anything to eat, when we gained our freedom from persecution and slavery, we chose what to do with it. To rush to Sinai. Not to pack, not to wait till the dough rises and have delicious challah, but to rush. Not just freedom from slavery and persecution, but freedom to be commanded in mitzvos, to be commanded at Sinai, to receive a mission to live a meaningful life. And Rabbi Soloveitchik explains a second reason why we do not make the bracha shehechiyanu when we count the Omer for the first time is because the bracha of shehechiyanu means thank you, God, for allowing me to arrive at this destination. But when we count the Omer, we have not arrived. We are on the way. We are in the midst of a journey. Counting the Omer expresses we have not reached our goal. Shehechiyanu is the opposite of that. It's a blessing to express gratitude for having reached a particular goal, but we didn't reach it. So we don't say the bracha shehechiyanu. We have not reached it yet. But we finished 28 of the 49 days. We're coming closer. We're on the way. And that's the mitzvah. I want to add one final idea from the Rav, Rabbi Yosef Soloveitchik. He provides a deeper insight to this mitzvah of counting the Omer every day during this time. So just to give an example, this past Tuesday night, we counted the 27th day of the Omer, leading up to the 50th day, which is going to be Shavuos. It's coming soon. Counting the Omer, says Rabbi Soloveitchik, is a bridge between the past and the future. Tuesday's number, 27, is meaningless unless there was a 26 the day before. And it will likewise be meaningless unless there is a 28 on the next day. A bridge between the past and the future. And I think that this message is particularly relevant to this season. We just finished observing the holidays of Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Memorial Day, Yom HaZikaron, Israel's Memorial Day for its fallen soldiers, Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel Independence Day, the 75th birthday of the State of Israel, and coming up soon, Yom Yerushalayim, celebrating the reunification of Jerusalem. The common denominator of all four of those days is that we must be cognizant of our past in order to appreciate our present and form our future. these are just some of the gifts we receive from the mitzvah of counting the Omer. My friends, thank you so much. I look forward to seeing the rest of you in person soon.